It's a brand new ball game here in Washington as the president heads to Capitol Hill this Wednesday to deliver the State of the Union address. He's dealing now with a Congress that's been dramatically altered by the stunning victory in Massachusetts of Republican Scott Brown to fill the Senate seat held for 46 years by Ted Kennedy. Healthcare reform is now in deep trouble, as is much of the president's agenda and the Democrats' political fortunes this election year. And this morning, a reminder that this all takes place in a still dangerous world. A new audio tape believed to be from Osama bin Laden, in which the al-Qaeda leader specifically mentions the failed Christmas Day terror attack on board Northwest Flight 253. So joining us this morning to talk about all of this, David Axelrod, the president's top political advisor. David, thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Terry. That
was the week that was. The upset in Massachusetts has Republicans stoked, Democrats shocked and in near panic mode. And polls in general are showing that the public is rapidly losing confidence in the president's policies and his leadership. Just by way of illustration, Time and Newsweek this week, their covers. Newsweek, the inspiration gap. It says how the trailblazer of 2008 became the stymied president of 2010. Time, now what? Obama starts over. So is it that the president failed to connect with ordinary Americans, or is this all a sign that the country's rejecting his approach in his first year?
Well, first of all, let's understand that we are governing in the worst economy since the Great Depression. When the president walked in the door, he was handed the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, a financial crisis that held out the prospect of the collapse of the financial system, and a fiscal crisis. President Clinton left a $237 billion surplus. President Obama received a $1.3 trillion deficit. And these are the problems that he was asked to deal with when he took office, and he readily accepted that. But I said to him a year ago, Mr. President, your numbers are going to be considerably worse a year from now than they are today, because you can't govern in an economy like this without great disaffection. And that's what's happened. People are working harder. If they have a job, they're working harder for less. They're falling behind. That's been true for a decade. They look at a wave of irresponsibility from Wall Street to Washington that led to that, those were the frustrations that got the president elected in the first place, and they were reflected again on Tuesday.
But it's not just the situation, is it, David? I wonder if it's also, and this is what I'm asking, the policies and the approach of the president. If you had the last few months leading up to this political moment to do over, what would you do over? What have you learned?
Well, look, first of all, some of those policies were ones that no one wanted to undertake, but were absolutely essential. Nobody wanted to have to throw a lifeline to the financial sector. Nobody wanted to shore up the auto industry. Nobody wanted a $787 billion emergency recovery act as our first initiative as president, but our responsibility was to make sure that the economy didn't tip into a second Great Depression, which was a real possibility. But those were not popular things to do. I have no regrets about that. I think history will look back and say the president of the United States met his responsibility.
You wouldn't do anything differently.
Healthcare, one of the great burdens on middle-class families across the country, whether they have insurance or not, on small businesses, on government generally, is the cost of health care. And what the president has tried to do, and it continues to try to do, is deal with that so people don't have to face bankruptcy if they get sick, so that if you have a pre-existing condition, you can get covered. If you're a small business, you can afford health care. This is all part of bringing economic security to the American people. The process, 8 months of debate, were less than satisfying, and that was clear. And if you look at the polls out of Massachusetts, people reacted as much to the process as anything else. Were there things we could have done there? Perhaps. We have to think that through. But this president's never going to stop fighting to create jobs, to raise incomes, and to push back on the special interest dominance in Washington and this withering partisanship that keeps us from solving problems.
So no do-overs. But now David Plouffe is back, the president's campaign manager in 2008, the architect going over to the Democratic National Committee to help oversee House, Senate, and gubernatorial races. It seems that this whole political moment caught you off guard a little bit, at least in Massachusetts. Is the return of David Plouffe to a position of prominence here essentially an admission that the White House political operation failed the president and the party?
Well, look, first of all, I think that there was the entire political community was caught a little bit unawares on that one. But so we have a very strong political operation. What it's a reflection of is that David was working on his book for the last year. He's done with that now. He's enormously talented, as everyone knows, and he brings value added to our operation as we look forward in terms of strategy and tactics. And he'll be consulting with us on that, and we'll be stronger for it. I think that the reaction to it has been overblown, but I know that Washington loves Washington loves the shakeup story. Washington loves the when are we going to throw a body out story. That's not how we roll.
Fair enough. All right, let's get to specifics now. The impact of all this on the president's agenda. Healthcare. The day after Scott Brown's victory in Massachusetts, the president gave a remarkable interview to George Stephanopoulos in which he seemed to dramatically scale back his ambitions for healthcare reform. Here's what he had to say.
I would advise that we try to move quickly to coalesce around those elements of the package that people agree on. That we know that we need insurance reform, that health insurance companies are taking advantage of people.
So according to the president then, David, health care reform as we know it, that huge bill that Congress labored on for months, is dead, right?
No, that's not true at all, Terry. I think what he's saying is let's take a look at this. There are so many elements of this, tax breaks for small business, extending the life of Medicare, more assistance for seniors with their prescription drugs, a cap on out-of-pocket expenses, help for people with pre-existing conditions that are too important to walk away from. What he's saying is, let's get back to it. Now, I must tell you that if you look at the polling in the Washington Post yesterday on the Massachusetts race, it's very clear people don't want us to walk away from health care. They want us to address their concerns with the program, and they want Brown to come and work with us and not be obstructionist. That was very clear in the polling, and I suggest that the Republican Party look at that poll as well. Their policies were viewed more dimly than Democratic policies, and people were crying out for cooperation instead of obstructionism. So we're looking forward to working together to pass this on behalf of the American people who are going to feel greater and greater burden from these health care costs if we don't step up and deal with it.
You're looking forward to pass this. Now, the president sounded like he was reducing the scale. Let's coalesce around some core elements: insurance reform, cost containment. And are you talking? What do you think of the idea that is being? I do have a question here. What do you think of the idea that Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader Reid are cooking up that you could essentially strip the Senate bill of a few provisions on a parliamentary maneuver requiring only 51 votes, and then getting the bill through the House? Do you, A, think that's possible, and B, getting the original $800 billion bill that the voters of Massachusetts soundly rejected? Do you think that's a good idea?
Terry, again, I think you're misreading the Massachusetts poll. I think people want action on health care. In fact, the bill that the House and the Senate passed, which are largely the same in the main, were patterned in many ways on the Massachusetts health care plan, which is a unique plan in that state. And 68% of the people who voted last week said they liked the Massachusetts plan. Senator Brown said he wouldn't change it. So I think you're misreading the results out of Massachusetts. The president will not walk away from the American people, will not hand them over to the tender mercies of health insurance companies who take advantage. He will not walk away from people with pre-existing conditions. He will not walk away from senior citizens in Medicare. He's just not going to do that. And let me tell you, as a political matter, the foolish thing to do would be for anybody else who supported this to walk away from it, because what's happened is this thing's been defined by insurance industry propaganda, the propaganda of the opponents, and an admittedly messy process leading up to it. But the underlying elements of it are popular and important, and people will never know what's in that bill until we pass it, the president signs it, and they have a whole range of new protections they never had before.
All right, and the president and you sounding a lot more populist these days. The president on Friday in Ohio using the word fight for Americans more than 20 times. And the State of the Union address coming up this Wednesday. Is this really what we're going to see on Wednesday, what some are calling Barack Obama 2.0, the populist crusader?
You know something, Terry, I would be happy to sit down with you or anyone. I traveled with the president across this country for 2 years. I heard all of his speeches, and what he said in Ohio on Friday is completely consistent with what he's been saying for 2 years. We have to make this economy work for all Americans and not just for a fortunate few. We got to make sure that work pays, that people can who work hard and meet their responsibilities get ahead, and we have to insist on responsibility from our institutions, whether it's on Wall Street or in Washington. And we have to push back on special interests. We have to push back on partisanship and meet the problems that are important in people's lives. And that has been what he's been saying really since 2004 when he spoke at the National Convention. I think that, you know, in Washington, people look for signs, cues for their script to say, oh, you know, here's Obama 2.0. This is Obama. This is the Obama who ran for president. And the themes that he talked about in that campaign were very much echoed by Senator Brown in his campaign, which tells you that the hunger for that kind of leadership is still very strong.
All right, so we'll hear from the president on Wednesday night, the bully pulpit at the State of the Union. David Axelrod, thanks very much for joining us.
Terry, thanks for having me.